Good evening, everybody. It is Monday, November 26th, approximately 10 minutes to 5 p.m., and this is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Transportation Action Committee. The first item on the agenda is a report from Dr. Ravinovich regarding his communications with the Maine Military Authority, specifically the Joint Visual Inspection. Dr. Ravinovich.
Okay, I believe in front of you, you found an email that I received from Tim McCabe. I had a conversation with Mr. McCabe where I asked him to verify my understanding that in order for his company to send people to do the joint visual inspection, that we needed to commit to having 2 vehicles done. He said that was correct, but because he wanted to get a toehold, so to speak, into Massachusetts, he would say that our base price would be $30,000 instead of $35,000. I then said that even though we do have the funds to do it because of town meeting, that we hadn't yet made the decision that that was the way we were going to go, and that, so I asked, what would it cost for you to come down in case we don't go in that direction? Because hoping that the JVI would give us more information before we made that decision. So that's the email that he sent, saying that it would cost $5,600 for the JVI to send down the 2 technicians for 2 days, and that if we then determined to send 2 vehicles, he would take that off of the cost of the base price of $60,000. So that is the report as I was asked to communicate with him, and I have done that.
Comments, questions?
I have a question. Has the school committee discussed any of this yet?
No.
Will it be on an upcoming agenda? I'd be interested to hear what the school committee, where they stand on this.
I'd be more than happy to put it on the agenda. It hasn't, it is not on the agenda for the 28th, but we're meeting again on the 7th. The fact of a refurbishment program is known to the school committee, but I don't recall any actual discussion of the merits of proceeding. I think they're waiting for this committee to come up with a recommendation. So the short answer is they're aware of what we're doing because I make verbal reports to them, but there hasn't been any discussion that I can think of. Not that I've discouraged it, but I just don't think it's engendered any discussion. Is that consistent with your memory?
Yes, that is consistent. And that's why I asked Mr. Tatro to be here this evening, hoping that we might have that conversation.
Okay. Frank, anything? Were you all set?
Well, I guess because I remember distinctly the last meeting that we had, and $60,000 is a lot of money. And I guess my question is how best that those monies can be spent, how you can get the most out of every dollar. So I don't know that refurbishing 2 buses as opposed to, there was some discussion as to purchasing vehicles with that money. Would the vehicles replace 2 of these buses?
With what vehicles?
If the decision was made to purchase 2 vehicles, but they wouldn't obviously be new, because there was some conversation about purchasing some vehicles that were coming off a lease.
Correct.
I don't know what kind of vehicles those are. Are those the Type Ds?
They're big, they're large vehicles, is that what you mean?
So my question is this. Is it 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other, that you're gonna get 2 vehicles that would have the same life
I,
by purchasing them? Or are we gonna refurbish 2 and have that same lifespan?
the information that I have, I'm not sure when I got this, but I remember a conversation with Jeff, and it was his feeling, after consultation with his mechanics, that the overall benefit to the fleet would be greater if we got rid of 2 or potentially 3 98s and bought 2 buses that were coming off lease that might be 4 or 5 years old and have about 80,000 miles on them, than to refurbish buses that were early 2000s, but refurbish them only with respect to the non-mechanical and still have whatever problems associated with the mechanical to deal with over the next 10 years, 7 years, whatever. We have Jeff here, so Jeff, you want to come up and make sure I interpreted your comments correctly and those of Ted and Bill? Yes. Okay.
Well, how many vehicles can you purchase for, say, the same amount of money? How much are those vehicles?
We would have to go out to bid, obviously,
how-
but two to three, I'd say.
And the 3 only because there is 35,000, 25,000, something left in the revolver from
The encumbrance.
the encumbrance.
So we were given the authority, the town meeting before, to encumber $60,000,
Right,
in which we've spent, let's call it 25 for the sake of argument, which left 35 plus the 55. So it's 90,000 that we have as far as the bid. And depending on the year of the vehicles, and it would have to be the wording of the bid, a gentleman that I talked to who represents one of the bus manufacturers had said that if you were looking for a vehicle just coming off of a 3-year lease, so somebody that got a contract and they do a 3-year lease, then let's say they lose the bid, they now have those vehicles to unload, and that, so it would be going into its 4th year. So I don't know if we call it a 3-year-old bus or a 4-year-old bus, but it has approximately an average of 15,000 to 20,000 a year. So between 45 and 60,000 miles would cost us, in his estimation, about $39,000. Now, I don't know if that fits with what Jeff knows.
If we open it up to more than, maybe it made it 5-year-old vehicles, we could probably it'd make a significant upgrade and could possibly squeeze out another one.
all right, here's my question now. Just going with 60,000, no matter what you have for a ceiling, just going with the 60,000, are you saying that any vehicles that you purchase would have some sort of warranty? That's one thing. And then the other thing is, how many years would you anticipate getting out of those vehicles, as opposed to going to a program like this and spending the same 60?
Yes, it would come
What's
with
the difference?
yes, it would come with a warranty.
Yes,
With the refurbishment, it's the 30 per just for the body and the structure.
I understand.
And it doesn't count, obviously, the engine or anything else. If we were to get, say, 5-year-old vehicles, we would have probably a year warranty, roughly, from whoever we bought them for, and we'd probably require that in the bid as well. And then the life would be, depending what year it is, 7 years. I don't, with the refurbishment, because everything is still the same under the hood, basically, I don't think we get that long out of it.
Now, would this be actually taking vehicles off the road? So the 98s would the worst of the worst would actually come off the road and be cannibalized, and then whatever's left sold for scrap.
My recommendation would be that we try to trade them. Or the other option would be, yes, cannibalize for parts for what we do have left, and then ultimately go before the board to get them scrapped. But if it was possible to do a trade, that would obviously help defer the cost. And it might be an option as well.
But the bottom line is, 2 of those 98s would come off the road.
That's my point.
Yes.
Yes,
Because those aren't, there's no way those can even make the list for a
Correct.
refurbishment
Correct.
program.
correct.
So you're not really increasing the fleet, you're trying to maintain the number.
Correct.
Because until we go through this whole process with the RFB, I just didn't want to commit.
But taking two of the 98s off the road and replacing them with younger vehicles that have at least another 7 years on them seems to make sense at this point in the,
I understand, since we can't afford new.
correct.
That's what it all boils down to, no matter what.
Right.
Because, I mean, with what you have, with what's left in the revolving account is one, or
Yeah.
not even,
Right.
really.
Right.
So you're saying you could get two.
Two anyway, and what Jeff has said, if you word the specifications broad enough, maybe to include up to 5-year-old vehicles, you may be able to get 3 vehicles that are 5 years old rather than 2 that are 3 years old.
I understand.
And the unknown is the additional $134,000 from McKinney-Vento. That's obviously a major plus. On the other hand, we had a deficit in 2012
That had to be paid. Right.
that had to be compensated for.
That's right.
But that was less than the 134. Assuming the deficit doesn't grow significantly, we might have a little extra that would support that third vehicle.
Well, here's my question about that, though. I don't know if this is going off the reservation, but why spend that money, like, right away? Because instead of having, like, a little nest egg, almost having that in reserve, because who knows what's going to happen to these other buses. So as much as I'm eager to get the ancient clunkers off the road, does it make sense this early, now, to go ahead and just spend it all
Well,
on
there's-
replacing the vehicles? Like,
Yeah.
2 definitely, and then a third if it became absolutely necessary, but not just go out and do a third right away.
The short answer is, I would be hesitant for 2 reasons, with the following caveat. A, we don't want to run another deficit even with the 134. So we'd want to be extremely comfortable that we could cope with the operating budget with the additional 134 without running a deficit.
Exactly.
So that's one reason to hesitate.
To hesitate buying a third,
Yes.
yes.
The second issue is it's not 100% clear what's going to happen with the RFP.
Right.
And so I think, but the caveat to this is that if we had a vehicle that was essential to providing services today go bad on us with a many $1,000, and we've had this happen already once this year at least, with a many $1,000 repair requirement, I'd be extremely tempted to not, as the saying goes, put good money after bad, i.e. investing thousands of dollars in a 98, for example, if I could invest more than that but get a vehicle with 7-year life. So those are the variables that are difficult to anticipate. I'm sure if we limped along without any major, $6,000-7,000 repair on a vehicle that really shouldn't be repaired, then yeah, I think you hold off. But you don't want to be putting good money after bad.
Well, how many 98s are the really limping vehicles are there currently used in the fleet? Like, really, the worst of the worst?
We use all of our vehicles for in some way or another. and we have a
How
roughly.
many would you like to
Well, don't say, you
replace
can't say all
sooner
of them.
rather than later?
You
No,
can't
but
say all of them.
I'm looking
I
for another
understand.
word instead of clunkers or
Um,
limp-alongs.
Roughly half the fleet is a 2002 or older. So, a dozen at least.
Right, but we don't really know where we're going with this. So, again, I agree with you. I mean, if, that's one of the reasons why any of us consider buying a newer car is when the repair bills start to outweigh the benefit of owning that vehicle. So I get that. But I think that I would probably go with purchasing two and kind of, if it had to happen, and you go out to bid later in the year, but what's the deficit running now? What was the deficit before the McKinney-Vento funds came in? It was significant, wasn't it?
At the end of last year,
Yes.
it used all of the revolving account and an additional approximately $80,000.
Significant.
Yes.
Yes.
So purchasing, first of all, you have to make up for that deficit. And then purchasing two, you would use almost every penny in order to purchase three.
I think, my guess is, I won't want to speak for everybody, I think you're preaching to the choir. I think the hesitancy to go for all three, unless there was a great deal for
I
that
don't like
third.
draining the bank account.
But
There's
maybe-
just one other thing,
Go ahead.
and I don't want to complicate things, please, that's not why.
So
but
you're going to.
just for full disclosure, and this, I will just preface it, and then what you know, please add to this mix. So there is an opportunity from the EPA and the federal government to replace some vehicles that have old exhausts and they view as polluting. And I believe, first of all, though, unfortunately, it's not just we apply and we get it. I believe that there is a lottery of sorts. But districts like this that own their own are being encouraged to submit. And Jeff has gone through most of the paperwork and getting it ready. Is there a cost in that? I know that we have to destroy the other vehicle, so it can't be used anymore. But is there a, beyond the replacement of the vehicle, do we have to pay any money, or do they give us virtually a new vehicle?
We have to come up with half of the money.
Okay.
It's a lot of money. Still a lot of money.
So the max you could apply for was 5, which obviously it's something worth applying for, even if we don't go through it with it. It's worth applying
Worth
for.
applying, right.
Sure.
And we have to replace the certain aged engines, not buses, certain aged engines and we have several of them. And they have to be replaced with 2011 emission standard vehicles. So technically you could get them used. They'd be tough to find, but technically you could get them and still qualify. And we can get up to $30,000 back per vehicle purchased. So up to 5, we could get $150 back. So let's just say we spent $300,000 buying 5 vehicles, we get $150 of that back.
So,
It sounds like a great program if you had,
Well, we'd have to obviously go through.
if we had the 300,000.
Well, there's certainly funding issues.
but just to be clear, if we had 90, we could spend 180. And if we had 60, we could spend 120, in essence.
We do not, although I've applied for 5, we do not necessarily, my reading of that is that you do not necessarily have to use all 5 if you're accepted. Because there's certain things you have to do afterwards, including destroying the other vehicle. So my understanding would be, yes, that would be, you'd have to spend it up front. You have to, and then you get reimbursed.
Oh,
Do they have to be new buses or just buses that comply with the
They
EPA
have
standards?
to apply to the 2011 EPA emission standards, and there's specific requirements.
You know, it sounds great and, go for it, but it's like the same old thing. This is only $100. Well, that would be great if I had $100.
But it does sound like, since you don't have to go for 5, it would have the capacity of doubling the impact of whatever money we did have to spend.
If we had the money up front, yes.
So if we had, say, 60 up front, we get the equivalent, assuming we could finagle the 2011 standards, we get the equivalent of $120,000 worth of value.
I don't know what the vehicles would cost, but you get 30,000 back.
Oh, you get.
So if they cost 90,
If they cost 90,
it
you
cost
get
us
30 back.
60.
So it's not doubling your money, it's 50%.
It's
Well,
not even
It's
50.
30,000.
Well, a new
it's not a
vehicle's
percentage.
It's a
$90,000.
third of it.
Oh, it's not a percent.
No.
It's $30,000.
It's a flat
$30,000.
30.
So if you can find a used one or a new one, like you said, 90, you get 30 back and you have to spend 60 on one vehicle.
That's my point. That's why I said it'd be great if we had three, and you get reimbursed. So you don't come up with 300, say. You come up with
But
the reimbursement as well.
the advantage I'm seeing is you were thinking you might have to go to year 4 or year 5 in terms of the age of the bus, because in order to only spend, say, 30. Now we could get a newer bus for 60, longer life expectancy, and get 30 back. Yes?
I don't know what the price of the vehicle would be, but yes, you would get 30 back.
And given that you need to have this 2011 standard, you probably do have to spend more anyway
Correct.
to get it.
That's correct.
The 30 is fixed. So to me, this is a no-brainer. You get a newer bus for 60 minus 30 instead of an older bus for 30, 35.
Well, it
You
could
get
be 75 minus 30. I mean, it could, I'm not going to say 60. It could be more.
It's worth investigating. I think
that's-
there's some
Have
variables
we
here.
sent in the app?
And you're right, he's right. It's a
We were
complexity
waiting on
to
one
this whole
particular
issue.
thing.
But
But
2011 is the oldest the bus can be.
No,
so-
that's the oldest, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. That's the oldest the engine can be.
Well-
And there is a difference. You can actually have an older engine in a newer bus. So
No, vice versa, right? Newer engine, older bus?
no,
Newer bus, older engine.
yeah.
Really?
In other words, when you buy 2012 vehicle in your specs, you can spec it at the older engine.
It's the manufacture
Who
date
knew?
of the engine. There's a plate on all the engines.
I get it.
Of the actual date that engine or motor was made.
Who comes up with this stuff?
The federal government.
Let me see if I can summarize. Ellen's point is that to spend every dime would perhaps be imprudent. And so what she's recommending, which I concur certainly in October, November of 2012, that 2 is probably more prudent than 3, and hopefully we can get a third, or maybe even an option for a third when we buy the 2, if by the end of the year it looks like we're going to be able to handle our deficit and still have enough money left over, and of course the encumbrance will still be there. Is that what I'm hearing?
I'm not sure what the specific wording is for the articles at town meeting. I don't know if it said had to go towards vehicle purchase. That I don't know.
I don't know if the encumbrance will still be there, because there was a question, we asked the attorney to give us a ruling that since it was passed at the regular town meeting, therefore it was for fiscal 2013.
Right.
Well, the good news about that is we could always put something on the April town meeting.
Well, I'm really only talking about fiscal 2013 right now, and what you're talking about probably wouldn't affect us till 14 or beyond.
Which situation?
Doing the application.
The
For up to
application,
5.
the application
vehicles.
deadline's in 2 weeks.
Right,
and,
but that's for fiscal 14. I can't imagine that would be fiscal 13.
It sounds like they're going to move fairly quickly. I'm not going to say definitely would happen after July 1st.
Okay, so
Because once they get
If
accepted,
we
you
get
only have
it, we
6
come
weeks.
back and we discuss it.
when will you have more information on this program?
The application has to be sent, then we sit and wait to see if we get
Do you know how
accepted.
long you have to wait?
It does say specifically in the document, and I'm sorry, I don't recall
Okay,
how
why
long.
don't you keep us informed? And send us whatever you can find
I
out.
believe it said like by February. the beginning of February. I mean, I think it was only about 4 to 6 weeks, if I remember correctly.
Okay. Anything further on this issue? I think there's a fair amount of consensus. Frank?
I've been listening very closely on all sides, and my hesitancy is, again, this is a case of maybes and putting everything off when we have needs.
Well, we're not talking about
So-
putting everything off.
Okay, what I see is at least the need for the two.
Yes, we're in
Like you
agreement.
said, I would figure out how much if we know how much we have to encumber to guarantee that we don't go into deficit again. You're gonna have an estimate of that number. You'll know the number of dollars you have left. And then the question is, what can you buy for that?
Right.
All right. The problem with postponing any purchases at this point, the best buses are going to sell first. And what you get 4 or 5 months down the road might be a heck of a lot different than what you would get today.
We were only debating 2 versus 3. I think the
I
agreement.
know, I understand that,
Okay.
and I agree with you. If we target 2 in our own minds, but when you go out, you see what you can get for the 3. Sometimes you'd be surprised when you ask, what
Right.
can happen? Somebody may have a third bus that they want to get rid of. Why do I want to hold on to it at all?
Or you get a better price for taking 3 instead of 2.
I would want the same price for the 3 that normally we would expect to spend for the 2. What I'm saying is, let's just not limit our negotiation to the 2. We can always go for and say we want to talk 3, all right, and then say, well, okay, it's a little high. Can I take 2? Okay, and get the price for that. Okay, and see what my key thing is we know how much money we can't spend. You set that aside and then see what you can do with what you have left. Same thing if you were going out and buying a couple of cars.
I don't think there's any disagreement. The problem is we really technically don't know how much we've got to spend. We know we have the 55, okay? That was just approved. We don't know what we'll have to spend beyond that because we don't want to run a deficit in FY13. That's the big unknown. And if Jeff was asked to extrapolate his spending from since July 1 through October 31st, that's July, August, September, October, that's 4 months. If you took your 4 months worth of spending and multiplied it by 3 and added the 134 to your operating budget, because that's now official, what would it look like?
I think he'd have to get back to you on that.
Off the top.
Yeah. Last I looked, we're kind of where we need to be right now, but without having it in front of me, I honestly don't know. I mean, and I also cannot predict what our repair costs are going to
What? You cannot predict that?
be. I can't. I'm sorry. I don't know what's going to happen
So-
tomorrow. I can tell you what
What
happened
I'm
last
hearing
week.
is 2 is a stretch. From what you just said, 2 is a stretch because I'm hearing a price of some
That's exactly,
35,000
and that's
and
ex-
55,000, so we go for the 2.
that's exactly
Okay.
right.
Well, you're right. We're saying exactly the same thing.
saying-
How much
right.
money do we have? And we go for that. It sounds like we have 55. We may be 1. It may be 1, but
Okay.
we go for the 2.
Okay, anything else on Maine military, et cetera?
Just one short
Please.
thing. If the committee, and it sounds like we're not going to go in this direction, who is going to have the conversation with Mr. Cahill? Okay, I want a conversation as soon as possible as opposed to just
Fine, okay.
hanging.
Yeah, I'm not in the office tomorrow, but I'll call him on Wednesday and make sure that he understands that if we were in a different place, with the age of our fleet and so forth, that we really liked, I think I'm speaking for the group, that we really liked what he presented. It's just because we only have a limited amount of money, and right now it seems like this
Fleet's
is
too
the
old.
way we need to go.
Okay, let's skip over, for the moment, the legal opinions, the comments, and go to report from Mr. Tatro. There was a document that was circulated that looks like this. Lots of yellow. I think the issue, the number 1 is now unimportant. Number 2, estimated fuel costs for bid options. So what I'm looking at is that there is a declining amount of fuel that will be used for each option, and that each of these numbers would have to be added to the most favorable bid to come up with an apples to apples comparison of what we're doing, what it's costing us as a department versus what it would cost from a bidder. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. How confident are you in these numbers?
As confident as I can be with the current pricing.
Okay, so plus or minus 5%, 3%?
Say 5 to be
5%.
safe, but, you know, I can't predict fuel either, so.
No,
You know,
I
it
don't
could-
mean, yeah.
You know, so based on the current information I have, I feel they're fairly accurate. Based on history and current information, I think they're accurate.
Okay. Okay. Any questions on part 2 of the report?
I don't know anything about school. I know that you guys don't pay, school departments, districts don't pay the additional taxes. Is that right? So that's why it's a better option. Does the fuel price for the transportation department fluctuate on almost a daily basis like it does with the private sector?
It fluctuates, yes. It's
So
on a
it's the
delivery
same.
basis, so, you know, if we get it every 3 days, you know, but yes, it fluctuates the exact same way, yes. Whatever
Okay.
the price coming out of the pump in Quincy is, or wherever they get it from. But,
Okay,
yeah, it does.
yeah, because I don't know. So this would be a significant increase in cost if a transportation company were to, they have to pay the taxes that I pay.
Correct.
Okay.
Which is why we don't include it in the bid, because it allows them to lower their bid.
Is that common? When someone puts transportation out to bid, that the school district,
In some cases.
okay,
Dennis Yarmouth, for example, last I knew, they paid for their own fuel because it was a significant savings. But, you know, Weymouth and Whitman-Hanson, they had their own, and they had something in their bid called a fuel clause, where if it went above or below a certain price, according to the New York Journal of Commerce, they would either get reimbursed some money, or, which never happened,
yeah. no
or
kidding.
or they'd have to pay an additional amount, which sometimes were $10,000 or more, depending on, you know, especially when we hit that $4 mark the first time
Yes.
on some of these old bids. So it's usually a fuel clause, or there's some way to get that money back in the private sector. So, but it is done both ways, yes.
Does, and just for information, because I don't know, does the transportation department, they charge for, like, field trips, they charge the students, right? Field trips or athletics and that kind of thing. And is it for the driver and the fuel costs and the,
Yes.
okay, so it's just an estimated cost?
It's the fuel charge, which is, I think, actual, depending on the number of miles.
Right.
The driver's salary, which is an actual. And then there is an estimate of wear and tear,
For maintenance?
as if we were replacing them every 7 years, and that's how we come up with a figure of about $40 to $45 an hour for the use of the vehicles.
Okay, yeah, because I don't know. And the price of diesel is crazy, and these are all diesel engines, right?
Most.
All of the big buses, yes, and most of the small ones. We do have a few gasoline ones, but very few. The vans, obviously,
Oh,
and
the
and I
vans.
think we have one Sav cut that we still have gasoline, so probably maybe half a dozen gasoline engines.
What's a Sav cut?
Like the turtle top GMCs, the little yellow ones, not the half buses, but they got the like fiberglass top on them.
I know exactly what you mean.
Have I even seen what that looks like?
I'm sure you have. A lot of times they have wheelchairs on them
Okay.
in the back. I don't know the best way else to describe them, but
You should've brought a
microbirds.
picture.
They're usually about 15 to 20 passengers. Depending if there's a wheelchair in them, but they have the fiberglass bubble top that comes up over the cab. They're
Oh,
still
yes, I have seen it.
Yeah, they're still
Yep.
a regular yellow school bus,
Yep.
but they're just smaller.
The driver, it looks like the driver's probably out in the street, sitting out there. That one?
Yeah, they actually have like a regular driver's seat, and they have a driver's side door. You know, yeah.
I'm going to suggest, since our town administrator may be backed up further than he wanted to be, And since the number of comments were actually fairly lengthy, I'm going to suggest that we allow the town administrator and the superintendent and Mr. Tatro to put their heads together with respect to these comments and then send out a revised version. Does that make sense to everybody? I don't see the value of us sitting here and going over each individual comment.
I don't see that there's, I mean, they're mostly helpful in its
Yeah, oh.
language and dates. They're very helpful comments, but it didn't change the substance.
No.
No, I agree. I
Of the
think
bid.
that just, getting together with Derek, maybe the attorney and Jeff and I, and, just,
I agree, the comments were helpful, constructive, but shouldn't be all that difficult to respond to or accept, because in some cases, he was just trying to make it clearer, more helpful, more constructive, better for the town, whatever.
and he had his own questions.
Yeah.
Well, Rich is here on Thursdays, if you can get a
Right,
little block of
exactly.
time
That's what I
from
was
him.
hoping
Yeah,
that we could do.
great. Okay.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, though, there is one question that he raises, his second comment about 30B. There is a limitation for 3 years.
I noticed
So
that.
we would have to settle that beforehand. It really does put some very tight restraints on us if we do it under 30B. All right, so that's another conversation that if they could discuss and come back to the committee with,
I
I
agree
think that'd be
completely.
critically important to us. Basically, what he's saying is we go to town meeting, we can go as long as we want. If we try to do it any other way, the 30B, which is the way this is written, which would fit with the 3-year contract for Braintree, which I think was the model for this, it could be problematic for us. So that's
Right.
another item that needs to be discussed before it goes out.
Yeah, because my interpretation of it is that it would still go under 30B, which is the 3-year limit. However, if we got it approved by town meeting for a longer period, I'm just saying all of the rest of the regulations of 30B, I believe, would still apply. Just the time limit, adding that 4th or 5th year would have to go through town meeting.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay.
With that issue should be settled up front, so we don't have to settle it on town meeting floor.
Okay. So just, I'm thinking for the next meeting, which I don't feel any great urgency, I think the committee probably expects the Transportation Department to go forward with two purchases of large buses, but not a third. And the next meeting, it would be nice to have,
Which still has to be bid, so there's it's
Oh, no,
not
no.
like we can go out tomorrow.
oh, no, no, I understand that. There's a process.
Right.
But it doesn't need,
We don't have to come back,
right. And it involves the town administrator.
correct.
Right. No, but I'm thinking in terms of when we should meet and what we should meet on. I would love to have more details on this EPA. Does that, but you said you're gonna respond to that in the next 2 weeks anyway, so
The deadline is December 13th.
December 13th.
But I can email you the whole packet if you'd like it. I can give you the website if you want to peruse that, anything you want to do.
Do you have an executive summary? I guess, but Frank's point is also well taken. So why don't we leave it, when do you think is realistic to have a finalized version of this RFP?
It kind of depends on Derek's schedule with the attorney. I mean, I'll call him tomorrow and ask him whether we can get in Thursday or the next Thursday.
I'm just thinking if we,
When was the next meeting for the school committee in December, did you say?
the first is the one on the 7th, and there's probably one on the 21st then. No?
Yeah, I'm not sure with Christmas, probably.
I think so there's one on the 28th, then the 7th.
The 19th?
How do we have 7th? The 19th is
Wednesday.
oh, that's why.
So-
I keep saying the 19th, but it's the 5th.
Do you
Yes.
want to try for like the 17th, so that that gives enough time, and we may, you'll have something to bring to the school committee?
Fine, works for me.
What do you think?
December
17th.
17th.
Is that all right with everybody?
Yes, Frank?
Yes, I'm very concerned that we need to do something with this RFP in time to deal with it from the budget side. I think we have to have a bus proposal ready for the joint meeting between the Board of Selectmen, the school committee, and the FinCom, because it's going to be the elephant in the room.
It takes, after we get approval of the way it's written, it takes at least 3 weeks because you have to put it in the journal. And if you miss a Tuesday, then you have to wait the full week for the next Tuesday to get it listed on a Thursday. And then it has to be in for 2 weeks before you can have an opening and a pre-bid meeting. And
Well, does it have to come back to this committee, Frank, before it goes out? Is that your concern?
I'm not going to get encumbered by whether or not the committee has to bless it. What I'm looking at is I think that something has to be on the table for the budget. Now, if that means that, the committee has to pass on a few items, I guess we have to pass on them.
and that's the
If
January
we know the
meeting.
timetable.
Do we have
I'm
that
sorry, but
scheduled?
Yeah.
you need to know your expenses for 2014, either on a capital side or on an operating
Well,
side.
let me agree with you, but say the following. If we were to privatize, there's only one circumstance under which we would privatize, I assume, and that is if it was going to save us some money. If for some reason we didn't have the numbers for privatization before the January hearing on the budget, the all-inclusive budget.
Which I believe, just for the date purposes, I believe it's January 23rd.
That
Almost
sounds
done.
Is that what you have?
That's okay, it's all good.
January 23rd, public hearing on the budget, is that what you have?
close enough, but I think you're right. It's
I think so, yes.
it is scheduled. Well, no,
The 16th is the hearing?
16th is the hearing, and then a week later is the actual school committee vote on the budget? That could be.
When's the joint meeting? I wasn't notified of a joint meeting.
Oh, then the 23rd
You
ought
sure
to be the
it's-
joint meeting.
I think that joint meeting is the 23rd,
Derek, do you know?
actually.
For
Has
the
it-
joint meeting on the overall budget?
With the FinCom, the Board of Selectmen, and the school
It's the
committee?
school committee's public hearing on the budget that
It's the week before
No.
the vote.
you
So
folks are at
I think
as
you're
well.
right. I think it's the 23rd.
I think it's the 23rd,
So you've already kind of scheduled it?
yes.
Okay.
But here's the point I was going to make. Privatization is an effort to save money. I think we agree. So if we went into the budget process with a number, it would be, the amount that we would be spending would be that amount or less, not more. You follow me so far?
Yes.
Okay. That's good news. The problem is that what we haven't resolved, and to me, it's the most difficult issue on which to get consensus, is if that number is, how do I want to put this? If that number, like perhaps many other numbers in the budget, cannot be managed, how much pressure will there be on the school committee to go to options 2, 3, or 4? That's the real issue. The RFP, in my mind, is not the real issue, because the RFP will only save us money, potentially, or it won't save us money, but it's not going to increase our costs. The only problem is we don't have a community-wide agreement, because unlike the some other aspects of the budget process, the transportation department is a little bit schizophrenic. It's the responsibility of the school committee.
No offense.
It's the responsibility of the school committee to run it. And let's assume it's the least expensive alternative, or the lesser expense compared to privatization. but it's the responsibility of the town to fund the operation. And that makes it somewhat, to use my term, schizophrenic. And so if we don't have a consensus on that issue, it seems to me that is the fundamental problem.
I agree 100%. That's the elephant in the room.
So if that was what you were describing as the elephant in the room, I agree with you completely. But that, in a sense, is an elephant we can address anytime.
Not quite.
But we haven't.
And the sooner the better. The
Not
sooner
quite-
the
Not
better.
quite, because if you continue to run it, then you're going to have to address capital issues.
Agreed.
If you privatize it, it's all operating issues. It is totally handled differently as to how it is funded. One can be funded by bonds, the other has to be funded through operational revenues. That's the
Well, that's true.
concern
That
that I
makes-
have on the side from.
Fair enough. That's
That's the problem, okay?
well, yeah, that's a secondary problem.
It's not a secondary, it's the primary problem.
I don't mean to minimize it, but until you have consensus on just how much service we're going to provide,
That's why I thought we needed to have this bid ahead of time, so that we knew what was available for what kind of dollars, and then we'd have to make a decision as to what we could do if we held it in-house and match. I thought we were trying to do that. I thought that's what this exercise was, to see what privatized costs would be and what our costs would be. We may still, in the end, wind up taking one of these options, no matter which way we go. But the whole key, in my mind, my recall of this was to find out how much these would cost in a privatized situation, so we could compare it to what we can do.
yeah, the problem is that we know that each option is going to cost less. The dollars, we can see just from the gasoline costs, the diesel costs, that they're going to cost less. What the RFP will not decide for us is which option. It may decide which is the lesser of the two in terms of expense, town operated or privatized, but it will not tell us which option to choose.
We're still in agreement, but the thing is we know what we can do internally. We don't know what's available from the outside. That was my understanding of the RFP, was to find out what's available from the outside. I may be wrong in that assumption, but I don't understand what the exercise of this is, quite frankly, because we have no outside information. We just have our own internal numbers.
My understanding of the primary reason for the RFP process is to put to bed once and for all, or at least for a while, the fact, what is the less expensive way to provide the service?
Again, we're agreeing, and I'm just saying that we need to have that information when we sit down in January as to which way the school buses are going.
And what I'm saying
And
is,
why?
even if we have that information, it won't answer the question of how much service do we want to provide, even if it costs less one way or the other.
All right, well, again, to me, it's a question of how much money you have and what can you afford to spend. I mean, that you're going to be limited by some number, and then I think you would take the maximum amount of service you could provide with that number. That would be your
I
target.
think we're off the agenda. I'd like to put this issue on the agenda for the 17th, because I think, and then I will shut up and ask everybody else to do so as well. I think this is the heart of the matter, in the sense that somebody could make an argument that basically what the town has to do is provide safety for its citizens, and we're constitutionally required to provide an education for the children of our citizens. Other than balancing the books and collecting the revenue, almost everything else is essentially discretionary. Someone could make that argument, and therefore everything else should go before we stop providing transportation to children, because that's mandated.
Okay. Jeff, you're singing to the choir on all this.
Yeah, I know.
The question is when do we have the information to make the comparisons, to come back and say, you know what, I don't care what we could do privatized in savings, what we would have to give up on the moral and philosophical and educational sides might be too great. There's some comparisons to be made. What I'm saying right now is we don't have an adequate information base. I would hope that this would be done as quickly as possible, so that when the questions come up as to which way we're going, we could answer them, we'd have the data.
Fair enough, but let me
This-
give you
this
one
is-
scenario.
I
that
don't
we
want to kick the can down the road anymore.
I don't want to kick it down the road, but let me give you one scenario. Let's assume for option one, which is status quo services, that the RFP process confirmed that it's cheaper to keep it in-house. Let's hypothetically assume that.
You know,
okay?
we've been speculating and having the same conversation. I have to agree with Frank over and over and over again. Mr. Chair, can we just authorize this committee, just say for Derek and Rich and Dr. Rabinovich to get together, clean up the language, put it out
I'm perfectly happy for
as
that.
soon as possible, because we've had this exact same conversation since we've been meeting.
Is that a motion?
Yes,
Okay.
Second?
thank
All
you.
those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained? Great, 5-0-0. But to finish my point, let's assume hypothetically that the RFP process confirmed that keeping it in-house was the lesser of the two costs, okay? But that option two was, and doing it in-house or through the RFP, was less expensive. Some people will advocate, then we should do option two because we have to save every dime we can save, okay? Other people will say, no, we're going to do option one because that's what our children deserve. Hypothetically, you can have both, and that is the question. Far more difficult to answer that question, to get consensus on that, than there is to simply find out what private companies are going to do.
I fully agree with you, but what all I'm looking for is the transparency, where we can say, hey, look, you're right, option two might be equal. However, it requires a service level cut that's unacceptable to us for our students. That, all I'm saying is make sure you have, I want to see all the numbers. I'm not advocating any option, any plan. I'm just saying that we can sit there and say, we examined the four alternatives, which we took months to define, all right? And in the end, we feel that this is our recommendation based on not just financial matters, but also how it impacts the students in the community.
Okay, to be continued on the 17th. Thank
Yes.
you for the motion, Alan, because we're
be-
letting the town administrator and the superintendent proceed, and we'll hopefully get some numbers, which everybody knows I love to have, as soon as possible.
4:30 again,
Excuse me?
on the 17th?
4:30.
4:30, Monday, December 17th. Thank you,
Do
Kristen.
you mind putting the November 5th minutes, is it, and these minutes on the next agenda for approval?
Fine, will do. Anything else?
Motion to adjourn?
Second? We're adjourned. Thank you.